Okay, so for Need for Speed Graphing Lab, so we just went over your graphing lab, your initial graphing lab, which was about position versus time graphs. This one's about velocity versus time graphs. Right? Those are the ones we've been working on the last couple of days. Okay, so what we need to think about is, what can I first off read right off of a velocity versus time graph? It's not a trick. Time and velocity, right? Because that's what's on there. All right, so I can read the instantaneous velocity and I can read the times. That's what I can get off of that graph. Okay, now I can calculate a couple of things off of a velocity versus time graph as well. So let's say I get a graph that looks like that, because that's kind of what we're going to get. Okay, I want to find here, the problem here is, how can I get acceleration off of this graph? Okay, that's the problem we're investigating here, and we want to kind of see which of the cars we're going to look at is going to accelerate the quickest. So on this axis, I've got meters per second. On this axis, I've got seconds. Since acceleration is a change in velocity, okay, we should be able, over time, we should be able to figure out how to calculate acceleration from here. Agreed? Because we can see the change in velocity on this graph, and we can see the change in time as well. All right? So if we know we're dealing with acceleration, if we look at our formula sheet, we see that formula on there. Okay? Can we get those three variables from this graph? We can. Okay? In fact, this is really just this. Isn't it? Okay? Because if I find 2 points on this line, let's say here and there, okay? If I go over to here, this is my y2 because it's the second point, but it's also my final velocity. And this would be my, if this is my initial velocity, or sorry, my final velocity, this would be my initial velocity, right? Because it happened first, right? Okay, and then if I go down here, the distance between these 2 points is not distance, it's actually time. All right, so when I do that, I'm actually calculating the what? The slope, right? I'm calculating the slope of that line, because the slope of that line will give me what I'm looking for. Okay, our variables. Okay, variables for this lab. We're not actually doing the lab. We're borrowing somebody else's test data of acceleration of various vehicles. Okay, this chart is in the PDF document that's part of your lab report there. So you saw 2 things there. Okay, so what we've got is acceleration data for these various cars. Some of them are older now because I looked this up years ago. Okay, but anyway, we've got acceleration data for these various cars. So time is one of our variables, and velocity is one of our variables. Obviously, they have to be. We're making velocity versus time graphs here. Okay, when time is a variable, it's which one? It's manipulated. Where does that go? X-axis. Okay, so we've got to remember that. Okay, and then obviously velocity then is going to be our responding variable. Okay, you can figure out your explanations for those. Controlled variables, we're not running this experiment, but we can probably still think up what kind of things we would want to control if we were running a bunch of cars, okay, and comparing their acceleration times. So what would be like kind of an obvious one? Yeah, we should probably race them on the same track. Yeah, that would be a good controlled variable, okay, because that way we know at least the surface is consistent. Okay, someone mentioned in period 2 that they should probably all be driven by the same person. And I think that's a legitimate one as well. That way the technique is the same each time, and the weight of the person inside is the same. You can think up a third one. For our hypothesis, okay, we got to think back to what we talked about there with the graphing lab. Okay, in this hypothesis, I want you to tell me first off in the if part what acceleration is. And I actually did mention that right at the beginning of class. So if you go back in this podcast, you'll be able to hear me tell you what it is. Okay, when something's accelerating, what's changing, guys? Their velocity or their speed is changing, okay? And that happens obviously over the course of time. So you got to have something in there about what acceleration is. The and part is really just describing what we're doing here, okay? And we're basically allowing cars to accelerate down a strip, okay? In the then part, you need to tell me what is your velocity time graph going to look like for those cars? Okay. So you might want to use like what kind of relationship you think there will be. That would probably be a good idea. Okay, now I didn't give you a spreadsheet this time because there wasn't really a need to. You can just open a new one and start graphing this stuff in there, which I'm going to show you how to do right now. Okay, so what you're going to want to do is in Google, okay, open up a new tab by clicking on that thing there, okay, and open up a new tab. And then click on the little apps cube here so that you can get Google Sheets open. Okay, once you've got Google Sheets open, you're going to want to create a new spreadsheet, and that's down here on the big green plus button. All right, so if you click that, a blank spreadsheet will open, okay, and you're going to fill it in so it looks a little more like mine here. All right, now you don't have to do that right away, just kind of watch carefully as to what I'm doing. Okay, the way our chart is set up isn't really true with the way we're treating the data. They actually did the experiment kind of, well, the only way they could do it, but sort of backwards. Okay, we want to have time on the x-axis, so we know that time has to be in the first column, right? Because that's what we did with our last lab. That means velocity needs to be in the next column. But for each car, the velocities are the same. The times are what's different. Okay, they timed them to certain speeds instead of recording their speed at certain times, okay, because it's actually impossible to do that, okay. So it's a little bit backwards. So what you're going to have to do is, first off, you want to make this column look like this. This is going to be the column for each car. You pick 5 cars, okay, from that chart. So you're going to do this essentially 5 times. There's no way to put this all on the same graph. Okay, I worked on it for like 2 hours, and I just could not figure out a way to make this data, because it's backwards, fit on one graph. So you're going to make 5 different graphs. But here's the good news. You don't actually have to enter all that much stuff. Okay? The first thing you're going to do is, once you've made this column in column B, you're just going to copy it onto 5 other sheets. Okay? So you're not going to open up a new file each time. Here's what you're going to do. Okay? You can make new sheets, okay, within this file. If you go down here to this plus button, it says Add Sheet. Right? If you click on that, it puts in a new blank sheet. Right, so all you have to do is go back to your first sheet and copy everything. All right, so I'm just going to copy over the title for that one and put it in the first column. And then I'm going to go back over to the first column, and I'm going to copy, sorry, the first sheet, and I'm going to copy that whole column B, because I know those numbers are going to be the same for every car I graph. So I'm going to save myself the bother of entering them 5 times by entering them once and copying them. Then I go over to my new sheet, and I click on here, and I just go paste, and they show up. All I have to do is change the name of the car. Okay, so now it would be, I don't know, Beetle. Okay. Okay, so you're going to have one file that's going to have 5 sheets because you're picking 5 cars. All right, and you're going to make a graph on each sheet. You do not need to copy this chart over into your lab report, because this chart is already there in the form of that big chart. Okay, so you don't need to copy this over. All I want to see are your 5 graphs. Is that clear to everybody? Okay, your 5 graphs. Okay, you build the graphs the same way we built them before. Highlight your data, okay, label your chart and your axis and put in a trend line. Okay, you want a linear one. Okay, put in a trend line and get your slope and all that kind of stuff. Now, for the analysis part of this, okay, essentially the analysis is filling this chart in. So you're going to have the car and the slope. Now, does Google Sheets spit the slope out for you? It does. So that saves you some work. All you got to make sure you do is get the units right. Okay, Google Sheets will not spit those out for you. It just spits out a number. Okay, I also want B with its units. Okay, again, B is something that Google Sheets will spit out for you. All right, rank, that you've got to do. Okay, I want you to rank your fastest to slowest accelerators. Okay, and then lastly, this will require some calculation on your part. I want you to calculate the displacement of the car in reaching 45 seconds using your line. Okay, so don't use the velocities that are given on the chart. Use the line to calculate. Now, did we calculate displacement from velocity versus time graphs the other day? Okay, what did we draw a whole bunch of while we were doing that? Shapes, right? All those triangles and rectangles, right? Because we wanted to have average velocity times time. Sometimes that meant a rectangle because it was a constant velocity multiplied by time, and sometimes it was a triangle and the average velocity was half of the height, okay? Halfway in between. So keep that in mind. That's something you're going to have to do. Look for shapes. Don't assume that your best fit line goes through 0. Okay? Look at your equation. If it doesn't go through 0, you've got a triangle and a rectangle. Okay? And you'll need to get them both. Everyone follow me? Okay? So keep that in mind just when you're checking. Okay? Checking that out. Yeah, so you got to fill in that whole chart. And then for this part, for question 3, where you're doing the displacement, I want to see your calculations. All right? So either you type them in Google Sheets, or you do them on paper and snap a picture and insert the picture. Okay? Either way, but I want to see your calculations for each car. All right? As part of your lab report. There's big marks for that, so make sure you show it. Okay? And then you got your conclusion. You don't have to do an evaluation this time. We didn't actually do the lab, so we don't know what the sources of error were. Okay? So you don't have an evaluation on this one. That saves you a little bit of time too. Questions? Okay, this is due Thursday, May 14th. Right? So you got today to work on it. I don't know that we'll get any more class time after that, but you have today's class to work on it and then next week. Now, if you want me to look it over, please make sure it's done when you bring it to me. It's tough for me to give you really good feedback if there's still parts missing. Okay. The other thing is that I will only be able to give you feedback on Monday and Wednesday of next week because I'm out at the track meet on Tuesday. All right. So if you come out to me, bring in your phone or your iPad or Chromebook, I don't know. If you bring a Chromebook out there, I'll be very upset with you. Okay. But if you bring something out there, Mr. Kudera, can you look this over? I will be like, I will ignore you. I'll run away because I'll be too busy to deal with it that day. Okay? So if you want me to look it over Monday or Wednesday, have it done and I'll look it over those days. Okay? Actually, for you guys, I could look it over Thursday too because you're in the afternoon. Period 1 and 2, you're cooked on that one. Okay? All right. If there's no questions, have at her. If you have a blank that says NA, like you have here, the Charger Hemi has one, and the Corolla and the Beetle can't reach 45 meters per second in a reasonable time, so they don't have data for that either. For those, make sure that both the time and the velocity are blank. Okay, so that way it doesn't try to plot a point like right on the axis and really screw things up. All right, so if it says NA, they just didn't have any data. Completely eliminate that row. Okay, when you plot it on your chart. Okay, so I'll show you here what I mean. Okay, so if you have, I'm just going to put some fake times in here, guys, just so you can see what I mean. Okay. All right, so if, let's say, for example, on this one, there was an NA on this spot here, then what I would do is get rid of this whole row. Okay, and so if you go up to, actually, I think you just right-click on it. For you guys on the Chromebooks, that's put 2 fingers on. Okay, and it'll ask you if you want to delete the row. Just delete the row entirely, and then it'll act like it wasn't even there. Okay, so yeah, a right-click on the Chromebook is 2 fingers on at the same time.